You may or may not know this about me, but I am an avid reader, specifically in terms of sci fi and fantasy. Now, clarification, I'm not a hard sci fi girly, although I have read some hard sci fi. I have very peculiar tastes. And so I'm not up in the book talk streets. Like, I have very peculiar taste in general. I look for very specific things in the premise, in the book that I'm looking at, and in the tropes that I'm looking for. But the reason why I bring that up today is because we're going to take a lesson from book talk, writing, fiction, and we're going to translate that into our launches. And I'm going to share this with how I learned this with you based on the fact that I read my entire junior library when I was in elementary school. So, how the story went was I've been hearing stories from, I was like baby, toddler stage. My mom loves to talk about the fact that she would make up stories to tell me. Actually, no, she would read stories from books, and I would want them to be read over and over and over again, and to the point where we had read all the books in the house. So now I want new stories, and so we didn't necessarily go buy books. She made those up on the spot, and then I'd ask to hear them again, and again and again, and she would be changing things up every single time. One, because she couldn't really remember the same thing all the time, and two, because it was just kind of more fun that way. So I was exposed to stories from I was like 1.5, 2 years old, trying to figure out my ABCs, right? And so by the time I hit 6, 7, 8 years old, I was reading everything I could get my hands on, reading things very, very quickly, like like water. Books were like water to me. And for those of us who are millennials, we remember the time when not everyone had a computer. Laptops weren't even really a thing, and neither were cell phones or Amazon or Kindle. So you couldn't necessarily just order up a book. You went to your library. I mean, the libraries are coming back now. We like to see it. But that was really my only source of reading material at the time. And I didn't have as peculiar tastes as I have now back then. So I would read literally nearly anything I could get my hands on. And over time, after reading multiple books where I could, when I could, finding things to read, buying stuff from the bookstore, I got to a point where we were like, okay, we're buying too many books. We need to get you into the library. So off we go to the library. I get the public library card, and I have to actually use my cousin's address because the library that was where we were, I think at the time there was something wrong and we didn't want to go to that library. So we went to the other one that was probably like 40 minutes away from my house, but maybe actually probably more than 40 minutes, probably an hour away from my house. But it was like maybe half an hour away from my school. And I would be in that area because we were commuting all over the place when I was at that age. So went to the library, used my cousin's address, got the library card. Best thing since sliced bread, bruh. But here's the problem that I quickly ran into. It would take me a weekend to read one of the books because I was like what, 6, 7, and I would be reading like 10, 12-year-old books, and it would take me a good substantial amount of time because these are like bigger books, but it would take me like comparatively no time at all. So because I was finishing one book much faster than I was supposed to, we kind of started accumulating library cards. So we went back to the library and we're like, can we get a second one so we can borrow a second book? And I think they gave us, that happened 2 more times. So I had 3 library cards in my name. That was not enough for me. I'd still finish the 3 books in one weekend, and in the school week, I'd have nothing to read. And of course, I want things to read after I finish my homework. Can you tell Chelsea was a little nerd? I mean, she still is, but this was the situation. So I had like 3 library cards in my name, and then I started getting library cards in my cousin's name. So I think I had at least 1, if not 2, additional library cards in my cousin's name. So that's like 5 library cards. And y'all, this is how I ended up reading off the entire junior library. Because I just kept accumulating library cards and flying through books. I would read like 1 book a day. So the 5 days also the week that I read, 5 books done. And we'd return them and borrow more and return. I read so many wild and random things in that time, like all kinds of crazy stuff from all kinds of genres. And it was fun. It was a great time. I mean, yeah, it was a great time. I enjoyed myself. Okay. And the lesson that I think reading all those stories and reading all those novels taught me, reading all of that fiction, it taught me how to kind of see how a trope or a premise or an idea can be tackled from multiple different perspectives. How we can talk about the same thing in multiple different ways. And I don't think I really understood how intuitive that is for me. Not even as like a copywriter, because nobody had ever pointed that out to me. But I don't think I understood how intuitive it is for me to do that until I was coaching a client a couple of years ago during a VIP day. And I was saying to her, hey, you don't always have to talk about this topic in the same way that you've always talked about it. So you are writing a sales email about your program, and you're going to talk about the modules inside of the program. You don't always have to just write the sales email about the modules of the program, and that's everything in the email. You can integrate and come at this from different angles. So you could come at this from the angle of an objection. You could come at this from the angle of an aha moment on a client call where somebody went through this particular module and had this aha moment, and that's a big reason why this module is in the program. There's so many ways that you can talk about the same core thing, but come at it from different angles and talk about it from different perspectives. And it's something that I intuitively did in copy that I wrote for other people, but I had never really taught. And this is the difference between like a positioning angle versus messaging, because messaging is the core ideas, the core things that you want to talk about. So in the fiction version of this would be like the core tropes, the core sort of like premise of the story, like the core thing, right, that you want to talk about. But you can come at that core thing from multiple different angles. So say, for example, we're talking fiction here. Let's say we're talking fantasy for all my fantasy girlies out there. You are reading a werewolf series, right? And one of the core sort of themes and tropes is found family. So in book 1, they come at found family through this couple who, like, we see their romance unfold, blah, 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 blah. In book 2, we come at found family from a teenager, right? And it's this young boy coming into his werewolf abilities and trying to figure out how to handle all of that while figuring out school and girls and career and like all of these things kind of coming together for him, figuring out like, and he's in the context of figuring all of that out with people around him, supporting him, and what found family looks like for him in his context. And we could have another story about a human coming into this situation, and she's potentially been someone who this has fallen through the cracks of the system and is escaping a really bad like situation with people who tried to take advantage of her. runs into werewolf land, didn't even know it was werewolf land, and now is like kind of an outsider, but she's been taken in by the pack and is trying to figure out like all of those dynamics and what found family looks like in that situation. Right? So there's like a bunch of different ways that you can tackle the same thing. It's the same thing with our launches or emails or evergreen funnels. Messaging is the core idea. Messaging is the core topic. Messaging is the core trope. Messaging is the thing you want to say, right? But the different ways that you say it, endless, bro. Endless. You can talk about this in whatever way you want that you have identified will resonate with your people. So I could talk about a particular objection to people working with me by discussing a client case study. I could talk about it by sharing my perspective on something that's happening in the world right now. I could talk about it from the perspective of whatever celebrity's last music tour or a concert that I just attended or a biz bestie conversation that I just had or a summit that I just spoke at. I could use any of those as positioning angles, different ways of talking about the thing to talk about that core bit of messaging, which is addressing that objection. That's what we want to do within our launches and evergreen funnels. We want to identify the angles of positioning that are really going to resonate most with our people and use those to talk about the core topics that we want to get into. Now, sometimes, don't hear me wrong, sometimes we get straight to the core topic because sometimes that's just necessary. Especially in sales emails, bro, sometimes we don't have to like beat around the bush or like create an opportunity for anybody to like be open to hearing what we're having to say with the core topic. Sometimes the thing is just the thing, right? But I really, especially in a doors open period, I really like to sprinkle in story selling in this way. And I know story selling is like it's trademarked and it's a whole thing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about using positioning angles, using different stories, perspectives, ideas, concepts, and weaving them into the core topics of your messaging. So after my clients and I do our messaging roadmap, where I kind of map out what this looks like, what their messaging, their core ideas, their core topics will be over the 3 to 4 phases of their launch, from pre-launch to launch event promotion to the launch event itself to cart open. After we map out the sort of main arching ideas, from there, we will start to pay attention to, okay, so now what do we need to say in these emails, right? Like, how do we ensure that each email does its job in the context of this core idea that we said this phase was going to be about? And so we're in a position now where we have to figure out multiple ways to talk about the same thing almost over and over again. And the way that we do that is through positioning angles. It's through finding different stories. It's through figuring out what are all the possible ways that we can talk about this and which ones are most resonant for our people. And then we choose that one. So I say all this to say that we've been talking a lot about messaging over the past several videos. Like, you can go back and watch maybe the last 2 or 3 videos that I've done. I've been talking about messaging hooks in like messaging roadmap in some way, shape, or form. I wanted to add this to the discussion because I think that so very often we end up underselling what we could talk about and what we could include in our messaging because we don't understand that a positioning angle can literally be anything. A hook can literally be anything. And you can talk about different core topics, different core ideas in your messaging from multiple angles. You can use metaphors, you can use analogies, you can use real life stories, you can use client stories, you can use stories that you've been exposed to from biz besties, you can use literally anything. Okay? And so I want to encourage y'all, if you're in a position when you're trying to figure out, you've written an email and it's dry. It is dry like chips, as we would say in Jamaica. Right? And you're in a position where you're trying to make it pop more, make it be something that resonates more, make sure that the core ideas in the email land. And in that email, you're in a position where you're just talking about the core topic. You don't have an interesting hook. You don't have a positioning angle that sets up the core topic in a way that would allow folks to receive that core topic well. Stop and ask, what stories can I use here? What perspectives can I possibly try? What analogies? What life moment that happened the other day? What did I do yesterday that I could quite possibly use as a story here, as a hook, as a positioning angle? Because chances are there is a connection. I just haven't seen it yet. And a question that you can ask, actually, as I kind of wrap up this video here, a question that you can ask is how much of this email is showing versus how much of this email is telling. And what I mean by that is, if you know anything about fiction and creative writing, I think writing in general, quite honestly, the principle that I'm talking about here is show, don't tell, right? We use that everywhere. Quite frankly, I use that in copywriting too. Show, don't tell. Now, if you are talking about your topic and all you're doing is telling about it, all you're doing is saying what's included, all you're doing is giving the brass tacks, all the facts, the figures, and you are not showing what has happened. So people can read your words, but they can't see it as if they were watching a TV in their minds, right? That's telling. When people read and they can't see in their mind's eye, that's what it looks like to only tell and not show. What you want to do is show, not tell. So people should be able to read your emails, listen to you talk, and see the unfolding in their mind's eye. So when I started today's video, I started by talking about little version of Chelsea, baby version of Chelsea, still learning her ABCs, with her mom, asking her mom to tell the story over and over and over again. You could visualize what that would look like. And as a matter of fact, what I should have done, I'm looking over there because there's a baby picture of me over there with my mom. What I should have done was grab that for y'all. So you could visualize it even more, right? And maybe I'll do that in another video. Maybe I'll tell another childhood story and I'll show you what that picture looks like. But you could visualize that. You could see baby Chelsea wanted to hear all the stories. You could see 6-7-year-old Chelsea reading off the junior library, right? Of like thousands of books across multiple years, 5 library cards, like all of these specifics help you to visualize what this could look like in your mind's eye. And once you start to engage with a story in that way, what it automatically leads to is you being open to the person making their point, right? That's what you do for your audiences. You hand them an opportunity to lean in, to be fascinated by you, by your life story, by your experience, by the way that you think, and to be open to what you are saying, to the core ideas that you are trying to communicate, to the perspective shift, the aha moment that you are trying to help them to come to. You want them to be as receptive of that as possible. And so you share a story, you share an analogy, you share something that they can visualize in their minds. And again, this is not the case all the time, but I have noticed that it makes a difference in cart open periods when people are selling their stuff and they've been sending like brass tack sales emails for the past 5 days. A story email really helps. A slightly different positioning angle makes a huge difference. All right. So please use up your hooks, use up your positioning angles. They are fully available for you and they set you up for success because they allow your people to receive what it is that you are dropping. Okay. To hear you, to have the aha moment, to stick around, to want to hear more from you. That's what these stories, these analogies. That's what positioning angles and hooks allow for. It's not just, I mean, stopping the scroll, yes, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. And when it comes to the sort of quality of our communication, and when it comes to how well we establish our messaging phase after phase in our launches, pre-launch, cart open, etc., when how we establish our messaging across the phases of our launch, how do we actually lead people to the point where they are ready to make that decision about whether our offers are for them or not. Having different positioning angles in your back pocket that you can pull for and add to your messaging in your emails, it really supports that whole process and sets you up for success. All right, y'all. If you have any questions about how to figure out different positioning angles, if you have any questions about how you connect your positioning angles to the core ideas of your messaging, feel free to drop those below. Alternatively, I do have my consultation hour right now, which is 50% off. So you can grab a spot all the way up until May 8th. After that, it will go back to being full price. So if you want to hear my thoughts, if you want my feedback, if you want my support, if you've got questions for me, feel free to grab a spot inside that consultation hour, and you'll have me for 1 hour to ask whatever questions you need. All right, y'all. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.